I am here because the Center for Public Policy Priorities opposes this proposed looking back instead of looking forward population plus inflation formula in determining Article 8. And I have a written testimony that's being distributed to show what basically would have happened if this had been in effect for the last couple of decades. And I'm very glad that Senator Hancock is also preparing this kind of historical analysis just to understand what would we have already been forced to do today if this had been in effect. Let me back up. CPPP, as you know, is an independent public policy organization. We use data and analysis to advocate for things that help Texans from all backgrounds, all income levels. And we think this does include funding educational and other access. Healthcare is very important to a lot of low-income families. Basically, a lot of people depend on the state budget to fund public education, colleges, and healthcare. And we think this could be a threat to the current state budget. What you're looking at the bottom of that handout is taken from this Senate Finance Committee presentation that Stuart Shallow did a few years ago. And the only thing I did is I added what's happened to actual gross state product. So actual growth in the economy as measured by gross state product. And what you see there, the LBB points out that adopted personal income, the rate that's been adopted by the LBB, has averaged about 12%, which has turned out to be conservative. Actual personal income has grown a little higher than that over that period, 12.3%. Both of those are slower than what's happening in the actual economy, which is closer to 13%. So we think that the current limit that uses adopted personal income actually captures real gross state product growth pretty accurately. On the other hand, population and inflation is well below that. About the economy grows about 1.4 times as fast as that. On page 2, again, real quickly, I hope you have questions for me, but what I've done there is looked at all fund spending and general revenue dedicated spending and adjusted it for gross state product. Again, if this cap had been in effect starting in the 96-97 biennium, throughout this entire period, state spending, even applying this to all funds, would not have gone above the 94 or 95 level of 7.3%. So you really see here, and I'm glad again we're doing this historical analysis and considering the type of inflation that's used, considering the compounded effect. All of these things really matter. What you see here is state spending shrinking as a share of the economy. And what you would have today, just to give you some actual numbers, Senate Bill 2 is introduced, would spend $205 billion in all funds. This cap, if in effect for the past 2 decades, would have had you trying to figure out how to cut that budget down to $186 billion. So you'd be trying to cut $19 billion at a time when you're trying to figure out how to pay for TRS care, facilities, all the things that you've been debating. So I'm glad you're considering this before further action.
Thank you. Senator Watson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. DeLuna Castro, I want to ask you, I heard some testimony this morning about the timeline of where we've seen a growth in state spending on a percentage basis since 2004. And I'd like to ask you, could you comment on the role that the property tax cuts that the state engaged in 2006 in the special session, what role that has played in the growth in state spending?
As you all know, the only time that the current Article 8 limit has been exceeded, simple majority vote, House and Senate, to exceed the spending cap, that was to add $14 billion to the budget over 2 years. So these figures that I use here actually take that into account. The cap was broken then, but you would have had to break it every single budget in order just to keep up with the economy. But what that did was basically added $14 billion in state revenue so that local property taxes could come down by the same amount.
So the bottom line to that was that in order to provide a cut in local property taxes, it brought about an increase in state spending.
But still not relative to the state economic growth. So even with that in there, the state spending is shrinking.
Great, thank you.
Senator Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Ms. Castro with CPP. I'm looking at your written testimony here on their table. It shows the adopted personal income, each year or each biennium, 13.4%, 14%, 11%, 13%, 14%, 11.8, 11.3, 13.1, 9.1, 8.9%. That's what the state adopted as their cap. So my question for you is, do you think people's income went up by that much over those biennials?
This is total personal income. And what we've had in this period is stagnating wages. You're correct about that. A lot of people haven't really seen an increase in their paycheck. But this is total personal income in the state.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is it's growing slower than gross state product, which is the bigger measure of the economy.
Yeah, well, and that's really my question, because you actually stated the state share is shrinking as a percent of the total economy.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I understand your point, but I think the question and the sentiment behind this legislation is the individual share of their income shrinking compared to their tax burden? And I think that's the problem. You talked about yourself, stagnating wages. We understand the needs of the state, and they are growing, but if the needs of the individual who's having to pay the bills is not keeping up with that, that's where this bill is coming from. You understand why that's happening?
Yes, I do, and I think it's also important that we're going to be getting a new report from the controller about tax incidents. It doesn't matter just how much is being collected in taxes from Texans as a share of their personal income. It matters how much the family in the bottom quintile pays compared to the family at the top. So we're not even getting into all these issues of who is actually paying and who is reliant. I made the point, people do need public schools and public universities to be affordable. So you have to take into account government needs to provide these services at the same time that it needs a tax system that grows with the economy. Our state tax system is not growing over time. It's shrinking as a share of personal income or GSP or however you look at it.
I think
So all of that matters.
I think if you'd ask people individually, their tax is not shrinking over time. I hear about
It depends on what
property
taxes, yeah. Property taxes, sales taxes, it
Business
depends on which
taxes.
one you're paying, right? Cigarette, tobacco, some I don't pay because I don't smoke, so all of that matters, and
I
we use
appreciate
it.
you not smoking, but the kids in Texas need you to smoke.
I never got into that.
Strike that from the record.
And you know I'm kidding.
That would drive up our healthcare costs.
Senator Betancourt,